She was my friend's mom, confident, graceful, and far beyond my reach. At least, that's what I thought, until the day she looked at me, smiled, and teased, "I'm old enough to know better, but I don't care." That was the moment everything changed. I never thought much about waiting at my friend's house. It was supposed to be a quick stop. He'd asked me to swing by before we headed out. But when I knocked and stepped inside, it wasn't him who answered the door. It was his mom. She stood there with the kind of poise that made me suddenly aware of how casually I was dressed. She was in a soft cream blouse, sleeves rolled up, her hair pinned loosely like she'd just come from a long day but still carried herself with effortless grace. There was a warmth in her smile, the kind that made you feel welcome the moment you saw it. "Come in," she said, her voice low, smooth, almost playful. "He's running late, but you can wait here." I stepped inside, trying not to seem nervous. The house smelled faintly of fresh coffee and something floral, maybe her perfume, maybe a candle burning nearby. Either way, it wrapped around me, making the air feel heavier than it should. She led me toward the living room, her presence impossible to ignore. When she moved past me, I caught the faint brush of her arm against mine, unintentional, but enough to send a ripple through me. I reminded myself that this was just my friend's mom. That's all. Nothing more. But then she turned and smiled again, like she could sense my unease. "Sit," she said, gesturing toward the sofa. "I'll get you something to drink. Water? Juice?" Or, her eyes lingered on me just a little longer. "Something stronger?" I laughed nervously. "Water's fine, thank you." When she returned, glass in hand, her fingers brushed mine as she passed it. It was the lightest touch, but it stayed with me long after she sat across from me. She crossed her legs, leaning back with an ease that told me she was used to being in control of a room. "You've grown up so much," she said after a moment, studying me with curious eyes. "You used to come here looking like a kid. Now," she tilted her head, a teasing smile forming. "You look different. Older." I shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Her words were innocent enough, but there was something about the way she said them, as if she was pointing out a truth she wasn't supposed to acknowledge. I tried to focus on small talk, on waiting for my friend to arrive. But every detail about her drew my attention, the way the light from the window caught strands of her hair, the way her voice seemed to linger in the room even after she stopped speaking. I told myself it was nothing. Just a harmless moment. But as I sat there, glass sweating in my hand, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't just waiting for my friend anymore. I was noticing his mom in ways I never had before. And from the playful curve of her smile, I had the strange feeling she noticed me noticing. The minutes stretched longer than they should have. My friend still hadn't shown up, and in his absence, the silence of the house grew heavier. Yet somehow, it didn't feel awkward. Not exactly. She sat across from me on the sofa, one leg crossed neatly over the other, her hand resting lightly against her chin as though she were studying me. Her eyes carried a glint, playful, curious, and it made me sit up straighter without even realizing it. "So," she began, her voice teasing but not unkind, "what happened to that shy boy who used to come here and eat all my cookies? You look different now." I tried to laugh it off. "Different how?" She tilted her head, pretending to think, though the way her smile tugged at the corner of her lips made it clear she already knew the answer. "Older." More confident. Or maybe just taller, she said, her gaze sweeping over me in a way that sent heat crawling up my neck. Either way, you don't look like a kid anymore. Her words hung in the air. They were light-hearted, innocent on the surface, but the way she said them, the way her voice softened at the edges, made them feel like something more. I took a sip of water, trying to mask the sudden nervous energy coursing through me. Well, I guess time does that, I said, forcing a smile. She chuckled, a warm sound that filled the room. Then, leaning forward ever so slightly, she added, you know, you almost remind me of your friend. But not quite. You carry yourself differently. There's something, she paused, searching for the word. Something steadier about you. The way she looked at me when she said it, direct, unflinching, made my chest tighten. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. She let the silence sit there, her eyes lingering, as though daring me to say something, anything, that would break it. Finally, I cleared my throat. You're teasing me. She smiled knowingly. Maybe. Or maybe I just like seeing you flustered. The words were playful, but the tone was deliberate. She was testing boundaries, watching how I'd react. And the truth was, I didn't know how to react. All I knew was that my pulse was racing, and no matter how many times I told myself this was harmless, it didn't feel harmless. It felt like standing at the edge of something I wasn't supposed to touch. She leaned back, her expression softening. Don't look so serious, she teased again, her laughter gentle this time. I'm only joking. But as she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, I noticed her glance linger on me just a second longer than necessary. It was the kind of look you give when you're pretending not to look. And in that quiet, between the playful words and the unspoken pauses, a shift happened. It was subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable. Her teasing wasn't just for fun. It was curiosity. And I realized, with a mixture of excitement and unease, that I wanted to see where that curiosity might lead. I thought her teasing would stay lighthearted, the kind of banter that left both of us smiling but nothing more. Yet as the minutes passed, there were moments when her laughter softened into something quieter, something that almost sounded like hesitation. She had been telling me a story about my friend when he was younger, how he once tried to fix a broken chair and nearly set the garage on fire. Her laughter filled the room, warm and genuine, but when it faded, her expression lingered in a way I hadn't seen before. She sighed, shaking her head with a smile that seemed just a little too practiced. I should know better than to tell stories like that, she said, her voice dipping low. I'm old enough to know better about a lot of things. I froze, unsure if she meant more by that. The words slipped out like an accident, but the look in her eyes told me it wasn't entirely unintentional. For the first time that evening, I saw past her confident exterior. There was something else there. A flicker of awareness. A quiet conflict she couldn't quite hide. I shifted, setting my glass down on the coffee table. What do you mean? I asked gently, my voice lower than before. She smiled again, but it was different this time, softer, almost wistful. Nothing, she said quickly, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. Just me rambling. Don't take it too seriously. But I couldn't ignore the way her fingers tapped against her knee, restless, or how her gaze drifted toward the floor as if she didn't want me to see too much. When she stood to adjust something on the shelf, Her hand brushed against my arm as she passed. It was casual, maybe even accidental, but the way her touch lingered just for a second longer than necessary made my pulse skip. "You really have grown up," she said over her shoulder, almost as if she was talking to herself. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to keep things safe, to laugh it off the way I would with anyone else's mom. But another part of me, the part that felt the warmth of her hand still burning against my skin, wanted to step closer, to bridge that gap her words kept opening between us. Instead, I stayed silent. She turned back, meeting my eyes with a half-smile that didn't quite reach her own. For the first time that night, she looked less like the confident woman I'd always known, and more like someone who was daring herself to step past the edges of her own rules. The playful mask had cracked, just for a moment. And beneath it, I saw something I hadn't expected, not just teasing, but temptation. And though I knew I should have looked away, I didn't. Because in that fragile silence, I realized she wasn't the only one tempted. The teasing, the laughter, even the playful remarks, all of it had built a rhythm between us. But now, as the quiet settled in, it felt different. The space between her words wasn't filled with wit anymore. It was filled with something heavier, something real. She sat back down across from me, curling one leg under herself on the sofa, her posture more relaxed than before. For a moment, she just looked at me, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed softly, as though carrying a weight she didn't mean to show. "You know," she began, her voice quieter than before, "when I said I should know better. I wasn't just teasing." I leaned forward, caught off guard by the sudden seriousness in her tone. "What did you mean?" She hesitated, then gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "Life doesn't always turn out the way you think it will. You make choices when you're young, thinking you'll have forever to figure things out." Then suddenly, she paused, her eyes drifting toward the window. "You realize you've missed things. Moments. Chances." Her words struck deeper than I expected. There was no trace of her earlier playfulness, only honesty, the kind that left her more vulnerable than I'd ever seen. "I don't mean to sound dramatic," she added quickly, shaking her head as if scolding herself. "It's just, sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to start over. To take risks again." I sat there in silence, letting her words settle. I'd always thought of her as steady, untouchable, someone who had everything figured out. Seeing her like this, admitting her regrets, made her seem human in a way that stirred something inside me. "I think everyone feels that way," I said finally. "Like they've missed something. But maybe it's not too late." She turned back to me then, and for the first time that evening, her eyes softened. Not the playful softness from earlier, but something warmer, gentler. "Maybe," she whispered. The silence stretched again, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was intimate. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed her fingers tremble slightly. When I leaned forward to reassure her, my hand brushed against hers. Neither of us pulled away. Her skin was warm against mine, her touch light but deliberate. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my mind, about my friend, about how wrong this should feel, but none of them mattered in that moment. All I felt was the quiet honesty of her hand resting in mine. "You've grown into someone steady," she said softly, her eyes still locked on mine. "Someone who listens. That's rare." Her words carried weight, not just as a compliment, but as a confession, one that revealed how much she noticed me, how much she cared about being noticed in return. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about teasing or passing time while we waited. This was about connection. Real, undeniable connection. The room seemed to shrink around us. The ticking of the clock grew louder, her breathing more noticeable. In that stillness, with her hand lingering against mine, it felt like something fragile and unspoken had finally surfaced between us. Something neither of us could easily take back. The air between us had changed. The light touch of her hand against mine should have been fleeting, a passing gesture, but neither of us moved. Instead, the silence deepened, wrapping around us like a secret neither of us wanted to break. Her thumb brushed lightly across the back of my hand, so faint I might have imagined it. My breath caught, and I looked up at her, meeting eyes that no longer carried the safe, casual warmth of before. They were softer now, more searching, as though she were trying to decide if she could allow herself to want what was already happening. I swallowed hard, my heart thudding in my chest. Every instinct told me to look away, to pull back, to laugh it off like some harmless mistake. But I couldn't. She leaned back slightly, not pulling her hand away but letting the tension linger. "You know," she said quietly, almost to herself, "I don't care what people would think right now." The words hit me like a spark. I should have asked what she meant, forced her to explain. But I already knew. Her voice was too deliberate, her eyes too steady. And in that moment, everything I'd been trying not to acknowledge, the teasing, the closeness, the way she looked at me, came rushing to the surface. I didn't speak. Neither did she. Instead, the silence filled with everything we weren't saying. Her knee brushed against mine, just barely, but the touch pulsed like fire through me. She didn't move it away. Her breathing had changed, shallow, quicker, as though she were just as aware of the storm between us as I was. The curve of her lips carried the faintest smile, but it wasn't playful anymore. It was hesitant. Vulnerable. I wanted to reach for her hand again, to pull her closer, but I didn't. Instead, I let the closeness speak for itself. Her gaze dropped for a moment to my mouth, then back up to my eyes. The motion was so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been staring at her as though she were the only person in the world. The clock ticked in the background, sharp and rhythmic, but neither of us moved. Finally, she let out a soft laugh, not from humor, but from disbelief. "This is crazy," she whispered, shaking her head slightly. "Yeah," I whispered back. My voice felt foreign, low and unsteady. But neither of us pulled away. The quiet was alive now, trembling with everything we felt but couldn't admit aloud. Her fingers tightened around mine, not enough to be bold, but enough to keep me from slipping away. And though no words were spoken, I knew. I knew she wanted this as much as I did. That knowledge, that dangerous, undeniable truth, filled the room heavier than any confession could have. And in the stillness of that moment, I realized we hadn't crossed a line yet. But we were standing at the very edge of it. Together. Time seemed to stretch thin, every second pulling us deeper into a silence that neither of us dared to break. Her hand was still in mine, warm and steady, and it felt as though that single point of contact was anchoring us in a moment that didn't belong to the outside world. She looked at me, her eyes searching, uncertain yet unwilling to let go. For the first time, her confidence seemed to falter. There was no teasing, no playful smirk. Only a quiet vulnerability, as though she was waiting to see if I would step back or step closer. When her free hand lifted slowly, hesitantly, I almost didn't believe it. Her fingers brushed along my cheek, feather-light, as though testing whether this was real. My breath caught, and I froze, every nerve in me alive. Her thumb traced along my skin, tender, deliberate. She whispered, so softly I barely caught it, I shouldn't, but she didn't move her hand away. I placed my hand gently over hers, holding it against my face, not with force but with quiet certainty. Then don't say it, I murmured. My voice surprised me, low, steady, more certain than I felt inside. Her eyes softened, and in them I saw a storm of hesitation, longing, and something dangerously close to relief. She let out a quiet laugh, breathless and shaky, and it trembled in the air between us. We didn't rush. Neither of us leaned in recklessly or spoke with grand declarations. Instead, we sat in the fragile closeness, both of us understanding exactly what choice we were making. Her forehead came to rest against mine, gently, like the softest surrender. The warmth of her skin against me felt intimate in a way that words could never capture. My hand tightened around hers, and I could feel her pulse quicken beneath my touch. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I smiled faintly, though my chest ached with the weight of it all. Neither do I. And somehow, that honesty was enough. The quiet stretched on, filled with the soft rhythm of her breathing. She pulled back just slightly, enough for our eyes to meet again. For a long, suspended moment, we just looked at each other, really looked, as if memorizing the lines of a secret we both knew we'd never forget. Her hand slipped down from my cheek, resting against my jaw before trailing lightly to my shoulder. My arm wrapped around her almost instinctively, pulling her closer until she settled against me, her head leaning gently against my chest. She exhaled, a long, steadying breath, as though she'd been holding it in all night. And I held her, not as my friend's mom, not as someone off limits, but as a woman who had chosen, in this fragile moment, to let herself be vulnerable with me. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't rushed. It was tender, deliberate, and impossibly real. And as I rested my chin lightly against her hair, feeling her warmth pressed against me, I knew we had crossed a line. Not with words. Not even with a kiss. But with something far more binding, the quiet acceptance of wanting each other, finally, without pretending otherwise. The room was quiet except for the sound of her breathing, steady against my chest. I held her close, my hand resting gently at her back, tracing small circles over the fabric of her blouse. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. For a long time, neither of us spoke. And strangely, we didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was comforting, almost protective, as though we'd carved out a space where the rest of the world couldn't touch us. Finally, she lifted her head just enough to look at me. Her expression was calm but uncertain, a delicate balance between wanting to stay in this moment and fearing what it might mean once the moment passed. "This shouldn't have happened," she said softly, her voice tinged with guilt. Then, after a pause, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "And yet, I can't say I regret it." Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't trying to disguise it with humor or excuses. She was letting herself be real, even if it scared her. I nodded, my voice low but certain. "Me neither." She searched my face for a long moment, as if trying to find reassurance in my eyes. "You know it won't be easy," she whispered. People, they'd never understand. I know, I said. My hand tightened gently over hers, grounding her. But we don't have to figure it all out tonight. All that matters is this. Us. Right now. Her shoulders softened, and for the first time that evening, I saw something like peace settle over her. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine once again, her breath brushing warmly against my lips. Do you realize how dangerous you are? She teased faintly, though the edge of her voice still carried vulnerability. I smiled. Only as dangerous as you let me be. Her laugh was soft, tired, but real. She pressed her cheek against mine, her hand finding its way back to my chest where she could feel the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. In that closeness, the doubts didn't vanish, but they loosened their hold. We weren't pretending anymore. We weren't hiding behind playful remarks or stolen glances. We were here, together, choosing honesty even if it came with uncertainty. The sound of a car door outside startled us both. My friend. Reality tugging at the edges of our stolen moment. She pulled back slightly, her hand still resting on mine. You should go, she whispered, her eyes searching mine one last time. I hesitated, then gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. I will. But I want you to know, I don't regret this. Not for a second. Her eyes glistened with something unspoken, gratitude, maybe, or hope. She nodded slowly, her lips curving into a tender, almost shy smile. And then, with a courage that surprised me, she leaned in and pressed the softest kiss to my cheek. Not rushed. Not reckless. Just a promise sealed in quiet affection. When I finally stood to leave, the air felt different. Lighter. Warmer. As if something inside both of us had shifted. We didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But as I stepped out the door, her smile still lingering in my mind, I knew one thing for certain: whatever happened next, we'd both remember this night. Not as a mistake, but as the moment we allowed ourselves to feel, and didn't look away.